What if a prophecy written 2,500 years ago actually laid out a chillingly detailed map of one of history's most brutal sieges? Well, today we're going to dive deep into just two verses from Zechariah chapter 14, a piece of text that, to this day, sparks intense debate about history, judgment, and what's yet to come.
So the prophecy kicks off with this incredibly ominous line. Behold, the day of the Lord cometh. Right away, it sets this really heavy, serious tone. But you have to ask, what exactly is this day, and what does it mean for Jerusalem, the city right at the heart of it all?
And that question, right there, throws us right into the middle of the core debate around this entire passage. Is Zechariah describing something that's already happened, a brutal piece of history, or is he warning about a cataclysm that's still in our future?
Okay, so the key phrase we need to lock onto is the day of the Lord. Whenever you see this, it means a time of divine judgment is coming. And really, two main interpretations dominate the whole conversation. The first one argues this prophecy was fulfilled point by point during the Roman destruction of Jerusalem back in 70 AD. The other view sees it as a blueprint for a future end-of-the-world kind of battle, something some people might call Armageddon.
Now, what's so fascinating is where the prophecy says this destruction begins. You'd expect an enemy at the gates, right? But no, the prophecy says the conflict starts from within. The city, it seems, is going to turn on itself first.
The second half of that very first verse says, "And thy spoil shall be divided in the midst of thee." Think about that. This isn't talking about some foreign army looting the city. The language here points to internal strife, factions fighting over loot and power right there in the streets of Jerusalem. And here's where things get really eerie. This detail lines up almost perfectly with what we know happened in 70 AD. Historians like Josephus wrote down in painful detail how, right before the final Roman assault, Jerusalem just consumed itself in a savage civil war. The city was literally tearing itself apart, wrecking its own defenses and basically sealing its own fate.
So how did it happen? First, a radical group called the Zealots, who were demanding a full-blown rebellion against Rome, took over the city's leadership. But instead of uniting everyone, that power grab just shattered the city into three warring factions, each run by a different warlord. They even turned the temple into a fortress to fight each other. But the most catastrophic move, they started burning each other's food supplies, destroying enough grain to last for years and guaranteeing the city would starve.
So, with the city already crippled and basically eating itself alive, the prophecy then shifts in verse 2 to the external enemy, and it paints this graphic, unflinching picture of the city's final fall.
The text itself? Man, it's just chilling. For I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city shall be taken, and the houses rifled, and the women ravished. This is the brutal reality of ancient warfare, just laid bare with terrifying clarity.
Let's unpack this, because each of these prophetic points has a chilling historical echo. That phrase, all nations, for instance, is widely understood to mean the Roman Empire, which was this massive military force that pulled soldiers from all over its conquered territories. And the prophecy's description of the city being taken by force, the homes being pillaged, and the horrific violence, it all matches the historical accounts of what happened when those Roman legions finally broke through Jerusalem's walls.
But the verse isn't done. The final lines describe two very different endings for the people inside the city. It talks about two distinct groups and their fates, and this is a really crucial detail for understanding how people interpret this whole prophecy.
So on one hand, the prophecy says, half of the city shall go forth into captivity. And what happened after 70 AD? A massive number of survivors were deported and sold into slavery all across the Roman Empire. Then it says, the residue of the people shall not be cut off. This aligns perfectly with historical accounts of a small group of Jews, which included early Christians, who listened to warnings and fled the city before the siege got bad, escaping to places like Pella.
So, with all these incredible parallels to what happened in 70 AD, you'd think, okay, case closed, right? Is that the end of the story? Is Zechariah 14 just a closed chapter of history? Well, this is exactly where the debate shifts from the past to the future, from prediction to destiny.
All right, this lays out the two big, future-focused ways of looking at this. From a Jewish apocalyptic view, this passage is about a future end-times war, often called the War of Gog and Magog, a symbolic battle where all nations come against Israel. And for this tradition, the prophecy is a promise that the Messiah will ultimately rescue the nation.
Then you have the Christian messianic view, which interprets it as a prophecy of the second coming of Christ, pointing directly to verse 4, which says his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, the exact place he ascended from.
So here's the kicker. While the horrors of those first 2 verses feel like a perfect match for 70 AD, the rest of the chapter describes things that just didn't happen back then. There was no visible, divine Lord fighting for the city. The Mount of Olives didn't split in two, and for that reason, most scholars in both traditions see 70 AD as a tragic foreshadowing, but not the final, ultimate fulfillment of Zechariah's vision.
And that leaves us with this huge, powerful question. For thousands of years, these verses have been a lens through which people see both catastrophe and hope. It forces us to ask, how does an ancient text about a city's total destruction and its promised deliverance continue to shape not only how we understand the past, but what we expect from the future?